So welcome back. And well, I really want to welcome Jnanavaca. I'm very, very happy that he's here. He's here for a few days. We've got him for 3 nights. I feel very fortunate that we have Jnanavaca as our president here at the Cambridge Buddhist Centre. I feel very fortunate about that. I think many of you will know him through his talks, a lot of online talks, and more recently, the Nature of Mind interviews. I've really enjoyed those interviews, particularly one with Ian McGilchrist. I thought that was great. And particularly, you know, Jnanavaca has that quality to draw someone out. Doing an interview is not easy, is it? I think, but I think you really did an excellent job with those interviews. And so I would very much recommend listening to those interviews and the other talks that you've got online. So I just want to say a few things about what I appreciate and value, and I'm looking forward to in these talks. One thing, Jnanavaca has a really I value this sort of clarity of mind. It's a very sharp, very clear mind. You seem to be able to have an ability to really understand the Dharma very clearly and articulate it with your own voice, in your own way, and communicate your own reflections on the Dharma in a very insightful way, and a way that's very accessible. So that's something I really appreciate. And sometimes with someone who has such a sharp mind, such a clear mind, it comes maybe with a little bit of an edge or a little bit impatience. But actually, Jnanavaca is the opposite to that. I've always found your communications is so warm and friendly, and there's a sort of lightness of touch with your presentation of the Dharma, and I find that very inspiring. I was just thinking before this evening, I sort of come into contact with you in quite a few different contexts, at the chairs meeting, in trustees meetings, in a range of kind of contexts. So I have seen you in a few different contexts, and I sort of picked up I want to mention just some of the qualities that I see in those different contexts. One, I think maybe has to come first, isn't it? That you seem to be. Friendship is really important to you. You seem to have many friends, and you seem to really love friendship. You love friendship. There's a certain quality of Kalyana Mitrata that is just really strong, and you obviously love and really enjoy your friendships. And within those friendships, there's a playfulness, there's a lightness, there's a joy in those friendships. I have seen you serious, but I've also seen you being very silly at times as well. And I love that breadth. I love that breadth of your character, your personality. But maybe a bit more seriously, something that has really struck me is I think you're someone who really exemplifies a reverence for the Dharma and a reverence for our teachers. I don't know. I think for many of us, sometimes there's a practice in that, in developing that, in fostering that reverence for the Dharma, the reverence for, and the gratitude for our teachers. But what I feel with Jnanavaca is that just comes very naturally. It's almost like there already. It's a fruit, and it flows, and that's a lovely quality and something. It's that reverence brings. It's deep, and it brings a depth. It brings a depth to what you talk about. So I could go on. I know time is going on. But in a way, lastly, I say, well, you have this range of qualities. This I think you're a very rounded person in a way, and in a way, you're able to speak to both the head and the heart in a very integrated way. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you've got to say over these 3 nights about the 5 Niyamas. Yeah, so please welcome Jnanavaca.
Thank you very much, Kaitaraja. Very generous introduction. And I must say that I'm very, very pleased that Kaitaraja is our new chairman. I've not yet had the chance publicly to say that, but I was delighted when I heard that Keturaja was going to be willing to step into this. Well, it's a responsible and demanding role. And I knew when Artapriya took on being the chair, which I was also very, very pleased with, I knew that it was going to be temporary because Artapriya has done his time as chair of centres and various other things. And I was very pleased that Artapriya was willing to step into this role, even if it was temporary. But I also had, well, a sort of tip-off that Keturaja was thinking about it. And I was very, very relieved. For some years, I've been seeing Keturaja, just how hard he's worked. He's worked so hard in Windhorse trading. I'm still a trustee of Windhorse Trust, so I've had a sort of glimpse, at least, of how hard Keturaja's worked. And I wouldn't have been surprised if when Windhorse trading folded and closed, if he'd wanted just a longer break. But he stepped into New View and into all sorts of other positions of responsibility, and now into being chair. So you've got a very, well, we've got a very, very experienced chair in Keturaja, so thank you very much. I was also just very glad that all of us are here tonight. I mean, I was nervous about, you know, giving these sorts of talks, but then Vidya Siddhi died. He died, as Keturaja said last night. And, well, just all of us gathering and chanting the Vajrasattva mantra, that feels like the main thing tonight. I mean, I will give a talk, of course, but it feels a fortuitous gathering that we can gather less than 24 hours after Vidya Siddhi's died to really wish him well. And I have confidence that our well-wishing will reach him. I don't know what happens after death, but I am confident that something of consciousness carries on. Subhuti was recently talking, giving some talks on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And, you know, that tradition of what happens in the bardo. And one of the things he was saying is that at the death of the body, the consciousness, as it were, freed from the confines of the body, becomes many, many, many more times sensitive. It's as if the body was a sort of shield to sensitivity, and will pick up on our volitions, our intentions, our thoughts of well-wishing much, much more readily. I believe that that can happen even while we're embodied. I think that you can pick up on people's metta, for example. But after the death of the body, I think it's much, much more, the communication is much more immediate. I believe that. Subhuti was teaching that, and I'm really glad that we have been wishing Vidya Siddhi well on his journey and can continue to do that over the coming days and weeks, you know, to his funeral certainly, and then and beyond, particularly those of us who knew him. I should say that well, Keturaja was saying that I speak in my own voice. My own voice seems to be going at the moment. So I'm a bit hoarse. I've come down with some sort of bug, and I'm hoping that it lasts not just tonight, but tomorrow and Wednesday night. So you'll have to excuse me if I speak a bit more quietly. And I hope that's partly also why I wanted you to come forward, because I might not be able to project as I would normally want to do. So yes, Keturaja asked me to speak about the niyamas. And some of you will know what the niyamas are and others may not. Either way, I'm not going to talk about them. At least probably not, and not tonight. I will come on to them. I'll try and come on to them tomorrow night. That's a little carrot to get you to come back. I want to sort of lay the ground before I sort of come on to talking about the niyamas, at least specifically. I say probably because I'm not completely sure what I'll get onto. I tend to have some rough ideas about what I want to talk about and then see what happens. So what I want to talk about particularly tonight is the Buddha's, in a way, central teaching of conditionality, of conditioned reproduction, of Pratityasamutpada. And why is that so central, and what does it mean anyway? When I came along to Triratna, I already thought of myself as a Buddhist. I already kind of intuited that Buddhism had some truth to it. And what I was really interested in was what is the nature of reality? What is going on? And I had hoped that studying physics at university would, I don't know, open up this question for me and maybe even provide answers, you know, the fundamental truths of the nature of, I don't know, forces in physics and so forth, space, time, matter. And it didn't open, well, maybe it sort of opened up something in me. Maybe what it did do was made me appreciate more sort of more tangibly that science doesn't really know what's going on, that physics doesn't really provide answers, that we don't know, really know what matter is, or time is, or space is. And the theories that physics comes up with about the nature of reality, about the nature of what's going on, about what you know, what we perceive as the world out there, those theories are, well, they're very, very counterintuitive. They defy common sense. They go way beyond what we would reasonably want to think. And they are just that, they're theories. That we don't have any final answers. And I'm not sure that science will, well, in fact, I'm pretty sure that science will never give us final answers, at least science as it's currently framed. I maybe come on to that later. So what it did do is open my mind a little bit more to the wonder of things, that we really don't know what's going on. And but yes, when I came to Buddhism, I was looking for answers. And in a sense, I was a bit disappointed. I was disappointed that Buddhism didn't really give you final answers. But what it does do is open doorways to wonder and to an experience that perhaps goes beyond the need for final answers. I was looking for, in a way, the answers to life and death. You know, what was the point of being alive if we were going to die? And what happened after death? And at some level, at that level, I've not been disappointed. I think that my life has much, much more richness and meaning to it, but it's not a meaning that I can sort of just put into words and say, this is it. This is it. Although it's interesting that Chaitaraja mentioned friendship. Increasingly for me, when I think about what's of most value in my life, it is my friendships. And the fact that I'm part of a Sangha, a community, where there are so many friendships, I do feel that that is one of the most meaningful aspects of my life. I may not ever know what the meaning of the universe is, but I do feel I am richer for those relationships, friendships. So the Buddha taught this teaching of Pratityasamutpada which has been translated as conditioned co-production. And Bhante, Sangharakshita, our teacher, has said that this is the unifying fundamental teaching of all the Buddhist schools. It's in a way the closest that we can get to a foundational teaching of the Buddha. And the teaching, you know, it can be summed up in a sentence. In fact, in Pali, it is just a sentence. And you'll have probably, if you've been coming along for any length of time, have heard it phrased as, well, maybe in different ways, but as all things arise in dependence upon conditions. And sometimes something else is added, is that when those conditions cease, the phenomena ceases. So when I first heard that, I kind of thought, oh, what is the big deal? What is the big deal? I'd studied physics, and I kind of thought, yeah, it's obvious. There are causes and effects, and, you know, is that it? And also, it felt a bit simplistic, and a bit sort of easy. Like physics, for example, if you just said, all things arise in dependence upon conditions, they might sort of say, yeah, okay, fair enough. But it precisely how and what things, and how do you measure their quantities and predict the outcomes, and so forth. Whereas this feels a little sort of bald, I mean, as a statement, doesn't it? And not particularly easy to know why it's the most fundamental, profound words of the Buddha. So Subhuti was very clear. I was listening to, in preparation for this, I was listening to a talk that he gave in, I think, 2009, a short talk. And he was very clear that this teaching, all things arise in dependence on conditions and cease when those conditions cease, this teaching is not a theory. It's not trying to be an explanation and a theory for what is going on. It's a pointer, it's a doorway to an experience that the Buddha had. The Buddha had this experience of enlightenment that went beyond all theories, went beyond all words, went beyond all reason, was ineffable, was atatavachara, which is beyond the sphere of reason. And he wanted to communicate that experience to the unenlightened mind, which was the rest of humanity. He wanted to communicate that experience. Now, sometimes he was able to communicate without using words. There might have been some people who he could communicate with sort of mind to mind. The Zen tradition is said to have started, at least this is the story, with the Buddha holding up a golden flower and Mahakashyapa understanding what that meant and smiling and getting it and having a glimpse of not just what the Buddha meant, but the experience behind the Buddha's gesture of holding up this golden flower. But for most of us, we need words. We need some sort of teaching in words. Most people, even when the Buddha held up the golden flower, didn't get it. Yeah, only Mahakashyapa got it. So most of us do need words. And the Buddha, for the rest of his time until he passed into parinirvana at the age of 80, he did use words, at least some of the time. And the sort of fundamental first words that he sort of, when he surveyed this cosmos with his enlightened consciousness, what he saw out of this experience of enlightenment,
is all phenomena arising in dependence upon conditions and ceasing when those conditions cease. He saw that everything was in flux. There was nothing stable and static in existence. There was this network of relationships, out of which other relationships arose, out of which other relationships arose. But there was no stasis, and there wasn't a fundamental ground. That all there was conditioned arising. So there's a sutta called the Mahanibana Sutta, where Ananda, the Buddha's companion, his assistant, his cousin, Ananda says to the Buddha, let me just read you what he says. There, the Venerable Ananda approached the Blessed One, and on arrival, having bowed to the Blessed One, sat to one side. As he was sitting there, he said to the Blessed One, "It's amazing, Lord. It's astounding how deep this dependent co-arising is, and how deep its appearance. And yet to me, it seems clear as clear can be." So Ananda is saying, yes, it's a deep teaching, but I think I get it. I think I get it. It is quite clear. It's quite clear to me. And I wonder if, at my own level, that's why I wasn't that impressed with this kind of teaching. Do you know what I mean? I thought, oh yeah, well, it's kind of obvious. Things are caused by other things, aren't they? It's not a random universe we live in. There is some sort of regularity to it. Yes, it seems quite clear. And the Buddha says to Ananda, he says, say not so, Ananda. Say not so. Deep is this dependent co-arising, and deep its appearance. It's because of not understanding and not penetrating this Dhamma that this generation is like a tangled skein, a knotted ball of string, like matted rushes and reeds, and does not go beyond transmigration, beyond the plains of deprivation, woe, and bad destinations. So the Buddha's saying, it's deep. This teaching is deep. And it's because most beings don't understand this teaching. They don't really see it, that there's suffering, that they suffer, and they're on this round, this wheel of birth and death and rebirth and redeath. And he talks about, doesn't he, this tangled skein, a knotted ball of string, like matted rushes and reeds. We're tangled up, we're confused, and we're tangled up in our confusion, and we cause ourselves and other people around us, other beings around us, pain. And it's not clear what's really going on, and we're not clear. But maybe like Ananda, who was at that stage not enlightened, maybe like Ananda, we think we understand. And that adds to the problem. Do you see what I mean? It's one thing to say, I don't know. I can't see. I can't get to the bottom of this. I don't understand. That's actually maybe progress. But to think that we know what's going on when we don't is to add another layer of delusion. So this teaching is meant to be a doorway into the wordless experience of enlightenment. Do you see what I mean? It's not a theory that we can get to the bottom of just by using reason. At the same time, we do need to reflect upon it, deeply, because if we just dismiss it, as Ananda did, by saying, oh, it's all quite clear, then we'll never penetrate into, we'll never go through that doorway into the experience that it's meant to lead to. Yeah. So why is it deceptively deep? I'm going to ask you to think about that. Why is it that, well, some of you might have had insights into it and seen the truth of the wordless experience that opens up, as it were, on the other side of this teaching. Others might not have done. But why is it deep? Why is it sort of not obvious that everything arises and, you know, yeah, there are conditions, so forth? What is it that is difficult to get to in this teaching? Any thoughts?
Painful.
Ah, go on, say more. No, you can say, go on. I think you're onto something.
I have a huge whopping investment in my ego.
Yeah.
And the only way I can keep that up is by ignoring lots of bits and pieces. Actually, one of the bits and pieces is permanence.
Yes. Yes. So that's, I think, that getting very, very close to, I think, why it's difficult to really let this teaching in. I don't know if, tell me your name.
Ava.
Ava. Did everybody hear Ava? So what Ava, if I can paraphrase what you said.
Yes.
Okay. So it's painful. And then I said, okay, well, why is it painful? What do you mean? And what Ava said is that what's really hard is to let in the fact that this teaching implies that I am impermanent, and to really let go into that, because I've got so much investment in holding on to my sense of, well, ego, you said, my ego identity, that I've got so much investment into it. So I think this gets close to it, because what you're saying, I think, Ava, the implication of what you're saying is that this teaching of everything arises in dependence on conditions isn't just out there. It's not just about the flowers and the candle and from physics's perspective, the material world. It applies to us. We are arisings in dependence upon conditions. In fact, we are just that, arisings, conditioned arisings that are in constant flux. To let that in is very, very counterintuitive. Yeah, and potentially, I don't know if it's well, it's threatening. It's certainly threatening to our sense of who we are. Any other thoughts about why this teaching is difficult?
Well, if we relate it to what's happening in the mind,
Yeah,
we have to be very, very aware
yeah,
to notice what's actually happening, which led to different mental states and things like that.
yeah,
You have to be acutely aware. Readers aren't normally acutely aware.
Yeah.
You can maybe see that flowers decay. That's probably quite easy to see, but
Yeah.
to notice what's actually happening in the mind and have a glimpse of why what that might be, what causes might have contributed to that. Very difficult to see. You have to be very aware.
Yeah.
To see that.
yeah. Did everybody hear yesterday, Darker, that if we want to actually see what's happening in the mind, our mind, and to recognize that that's arising dependence on causes and conditions, it's very difficult to be, in a way, aware of what's going on internally. We're not normally somehow attuned to that. So I'm slightly paraphrasing what Yashodhaka was saying. I think that what most of us, certainly before we started practicing, most of us were probably outward focused in many ways about getting what we want from life from external things. I know that we are aware of, our minds, particularly if we're in pain, suffering in some way, but I don't know if we watch the mind and see how conditioned it is and what causes various mental states to arise. To do that, you'd probably need to learn to meditate and develop quite a degree of mindfulness. So most of us probably are used to, certainly before we started meditating, most of us were probably used to just sort of taking our mental states as a given and not realizing what led to particular mental states, taking our personalities as a given, taking our moods as a given, taking our sort of worldview as a given, and then trying to make the best of life by getting whatever we could externally to work for us. Yeah. So we're not taking into account then that we too are a conditioned arising, and that our minds, our mental states and behaviors aren't just a given. They're not just random. So I think both those responses from Ava and Yashodhaka get at something about why this teaching is difficult to really let in. I wonder if there's further we can go. So, for example, even the very act of perceiving through our senses, our hearing, our sight, and the other senses, even that act of perceiving normally has a delusion that we build in very quickly. So you're looking at me and you're listening, hopefully, to what I'm saying. And probably unconsciously, you've got an assumption that I am out here and you're in there, wherever, and I've got the sort of similar but reverse assumption that I'm in here and you're definitely out there. And there's this sort of physical space between us, and we're definitely separate in that physical space. But then if I think about what I'm looking at, and you think about what you're looking at, well, I'm appearing as an image in your mind. All you have got is your awareness, and that awareness has in it, as it were, and I'm talking very loosely and not very accurately, an image of, well, what you think of as me. You don't really have me out here. I'm actually in your mind. That's a bit frightening, isn't it? So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that even this simple act of sight and sound, hearing and seeing, it's not as straightforward and simple as I'm a real fixed, separate entity, and the things that I'm seeing and hearing are out there, existing independently of me. Something, even in this act of perception, much more strange is going on, that is somehow relational. it's not like there's a fixed and separate me and a fixed and separate world of other beings. There's something much more mysterious going on to do with relations between us, between consciousness, in awareness. I'm not even sure I can put it into words. I don't know if I'm clear enough myself to try and find the words. Do you understand the mystery of even that perception? Do you see what I'm trying to get at? Like, it doesn't, we kind of know this, don't we? That when you see something, actually what's happening, science tells us, is that light is bouncing off the object that you're seeing and entering your eyes, bouncing off your retina, causing some sort of electrochemical signal that goes to your brain, which is, and now I'm out of my depth, and the brain somehow is interpreting the electrochemical signals, and in the cavity of the skull there is no light, yeah, and yet there's an image that then it projects out there as if it was an external thing to you. That's weird, isn't it? Now, the Buddha didn't necessarily know about, he didn't know about the science of perception or brain or whatever. But I think this experience of enlightenment would have revealed that perception isn't as we think it is. It's not a me in here perceiving a fixed world out there. It's not straightforward like that. There's something much more wonderful, mysterious, profound going on. And I think this teaching of Praticca Samuppada is also including that. It's also including that. Does that make sense? At least start to see. If we start to notice the perceptual situation and really pay attention to what's going on, it starts to open up into this mystery. So I want to move on to, well, look, what Bhante Sangharakshita says is that if the Buddha had said any more than this teaching about the nature of reality, if he'd said any more than all things arise in dependence upon conditions, then he would have started to somehow falsify the situation, and we would probably start to fall into some wrong views. Any more, and he would have had to sort of stray into views, into theory. If he'd said any less, he would have had to be silent. So in saying all things arise in dependence upon conditions, he's saying the very minimum that one can say about the nature of this experience of this phenomenal world, of being in it, being embodied in it. He's saying the very minimum without falling into wrong views. And those wrong views can fall into two camps. One is that we start to think that there's a real world of things, and I'm a real thing, and the world out there is real. And Buddhism, of course, is saying that it's not as simple as that. And then on the other side, the wrong view is that there's nothing there at all. That actually there's nothing going on. And that's wrong as well. So the Buddha was trying to avoid us falling into those two kind of wrong views. And views are very, very important in Buddhism. So I want to just look at why are views so important? Because it could sound like those two extremes of eternalism and nihilism, as they're called, just feel like philosophical arguments that are nothing to do with me getting up and having breakfast in the morning? What is the big deal about views? So again, I'd just like to ask you to see if you can say, why are views so important? Why does Buddhism, throughout all its traditions, put so much emphasis on right view, on clarity of view? Why does it do that? Why are views so important to us?
I mean, in one way, it throws it back on me to clarify, ask questions. So that's one part, I think, is that actually I need to challenge myself to ask the questions and to go deeper into my experience. So as a practitioner,
Yeah,
I think that might be one. That's what I think of immediately.
right.
It's
Yes.
like it's a challenge for me to
So,
be clear.
so it's a challenge to be clear and then to ask questions.
Yeah, of my experience.
And then that keeps you, hopefully that questioning keeps you on the path of going deeper into your experience. Because the fundamental premise is that if we're not enlightened, I'm not enlightened anyway, that if we're not enlightened, we've got it wrong. We do not understand what's going on. And that is really critical, because not understanding what is going on leads to unnecessary suffering. Do you see? That's what the Buddha was saying. That's why views are so important, because not understanding what's going on, we are suffering, and we are causing suffering to others in the world, to the degree that we're acting from views that are deluded. You look at what's happening in the world now, you look at the war in Ukraine, you look at, at the moment, the World Cup's happening, isn't it, or something, and there's all this controversy about, should it be happening in Qatar with its human rights record? People are suffering in all sorts of ways. Not all of the suffering is caused by deluded views. I know that there's an earthquake in Indonesia today, and I don't know how many people have died. That, in a sense, human views were not to do with, were not contributing to that. But so much of the suffering in the world is happening because of particular view systems. And you look at the last century and what some of the horrors that human beings inflicted on each other, fascism and communism and so forth, their views writ large, a whole society takes on a view about what it is to be human and what other people are, and can cause horrendous suffering. So views can matter at that sort of political, socio-political level. Yeah, but they also matter at an individual level. So at a psychological level, what sort of views as an individual, if you think about psychological views, what sort of views might bring unnecessary suffering to ourselves or to an individual?
They're separate.
That we're separate, yeah. And that we can't ever feel connected. Yeah. Yeah. The loneliness that brings. The neurotic kind of behaviors that can lead to. Yeah, that we're separate. That can go very, very deep, actually. Any others?
Another, with unhappiness, sometimes I think he's the reason why I'm unhappy.
Yes. He's the reason why I'm unhappy.
He's to blame.
Yes, that's right.
And there's a kind of relief in that. I'm happy and I think, oh, I know why.
Yeah.
It's because of.
Yeah. I think when we're unhappy, it's natural to want to find the reason why we're unhappy. And as you say, if you can hook that reason onto another person, or maybe onto a set of external circumstances, they can feel like, yes, there's a relief in that. But it's a sort of hollow relief, isn't it? Because it doesn't alleviate the suffering. The blame, if that's what we get into, narrows us, it narrows our hearts, it hardens our hearts at the expense of, feeling justified. Maybe it gives us a sense of feeling justified. Maybe it gives us a sense of righteous indignation at being wronged. Maybe there's a sort of satisfaction in that, but the cost is that we harden and narrow and ossify, and the other person is always the enemy. And potentially, at least, if we get into that state, we give away our power to change things.
The initiative is with them, isn't it?
The
Not
initiative
me.
is with
Yeah.
them. That's right. The initiative is with them.
Yeah.
So blame, he is to blame, is a very, I mean, I get into it, and I've been practicing for several decades. Or if not he is to blame, I don't know, some external set of circumstances are to blame. They are to blame, or whatever. Goodness, that is so tempting to get into, isn't it? And do you see how that's based on a wrong view? If we could really see praticca samappada, we could really see that everything arises in dependence upon conditions, that we are a mass of conditions in flux. So is he that I am blaming, a mass of conditions in flux. They're not a fixed entity, and neither am I. That changes things. That changes things. So this teaching, if we were to really let it in, would involve a renunciation of blame. That's hard. Yeah. It would involve a renunciation of me as a fixed and separate thing. It would involve a renunciation of the world consisting of fixed and separate entities, of beings, other beings being fixed and separate to me. It would involve a renunciation of blame. So that would be hard. Any other views that we can hold that are unhelpful, that cause us suffering?
To renounce freedom as well.
It would lead to renouncing freedom, yeah. Say more, Vimla.
Because freedom, it means that not conditioned by something else.
Yeah. So it becomes a trap. It becomes a trap if we are at the mercy of external circumstances and conditions. If our fulfillment and happiness is completely at the mercy of external things, we've lost our freedom, our potential for freedom. Yeah. So you can start to see how views matter, because they do color our lives, more than color our lives. It's as if views are like a filter through which, or a lens through which, we see the world and experience the world and other people. So if I have a view that nobody likes me, I will see everybody through that lens. Yeah. And what happens is often is I then interpret whatever happens to me as confirmation of the view. And then so if I believe that nobody likes me, I'm likely to already be defended when I meet somebody. And then they might not really warmly open up to me. And then that confirms, oh, they don't like me. So that's just a typical, simple psychological example of how we create a confirmation kind of of our experience through our view that then creates a whole world that we live in. And you know, a world that says nobody likes me. You could have more positive kind of psychological views that might be equally deluded, like everybody loves me. That does sound a bit more positive and probably preferable, but deluded probably. One of the things I want to say about this teaching, Praticca Samuppada, I'm aware of time, so I won't say very much, and maybe pick up on it tomorrow, is that it can sound nihilistic. What I mean by that is that everything arises in dependence upon conditions. We kind of, you know, you can take a simple example of a tree growing, and you can break down all the, well, you can break it down into parts, and you can say a tree consists of branches and twigs and leaves and so forth, and roots and trunk, and you can break those branches and trees and leaves into smaller and smaller parts until you get subatomic particles, and then you can leave that to the physicists to work out what's going on then. Or that's a spatial kind of way of breaking it down, or you can break it down into all the processes that a tree arises from: the sunlight, the water, the nutrients, the earth, the air, etc., etc. And you can see the tree as a dynamic process interacting with the environment around it. But both, and all of that's true, and Buddhism uses those kind of analytical methods to break things down into parts, or to see them as a network of processes. It does that, but that can still leave a sense that somehow this material world is just a complex set of processes, and that there's nothing beyond that. And that's all we are, a set of chemical, physical, biological processes. I use the image of neurons firing in the brain, but that's all we are, is biological machines, albeit very complexly interrelated to everything else. And that's not what this teaching is. That's not what this teaching is. If we just see it at that level, it's not the Dharma, and it won't lead to freedom. You know, we now know about things like how complex the environment is. We know that our weather systems are incredibly complex and interrelated across the planet. We know that we know about things like systems theory, etc., etc. We know how we affect each other across our species and across all life, etc., ecosystems and so forth. That's not the Dharma. That's included in this, but it's not what the Buddha was getting at when he said this could lead to freedom. Yeah, that still leaves out the essential matter of consciousness and a transcendence. So this teaching is trying to say that there's a potential in all of us, if we realize this teaching enough and see the truth of this, that there's a potential in us for freedom. From being trapped in this cycle of birth and death and rebirth and re-death. There's a potential for a new type of consciousness to emerge. That's what this teaching is really getting at. One of the things I heard that Bhante had said, he was saying, well, this was according to Subhuti, that he'd once said, it's not so much that everything arises in dependence upon conditions. He said that everything that arises does so in dependence upon conditions. everything that arises does so in dependence upon conditions, implying that there might be something that doesn't arise and isn't dependent upon conditions, that there's a reality beyond this conditioned phenomenal universe, this realm of conditions. Buddhism uses different words for that, and it does talk in terms of, sometimes it talks in terms of the unconditioned. Bante's talked about the unconditioned, it talks about nirvana, it talks about absolute reality, it talks about shunyata. It talks in different words and metaphors about something beyond this phenomenal conditioned realm. Asankrita is the Sanskrit for unconditioned, unfabricated, uncompounded. And it's that I want to maybe talk a little bit more about tomorrow. But it's that we have to remember as it were, the goal of the Dharma life. There are dangers of talking about it in those ways, because we can start to hold on to them in a literal way. But maybe I'll touch on that tomorrow. If there wasn't something like that, if everything just arose in dependence upon conditions, and there was no way out of that, then even if we could live a happy life and sort out our psychology and be nice to each other and learn to be kind, good though that is, I'm sure, so what, in a certain sense, so what if it all ends at death? And even if we believe in rebirth and we do it all again, in a way, where's the way out? And Buddhism's not just about a therapeutic, palliative adjustment to this conditioned world so that we can be more comfortable in it and nicer to each other. That's what humanism is, isn't it? Or secular humanism would say, let's do that to each other. And let's not destroy the environment in the meantime. But Buddhism's saying, there's a transcendent goal. There's a transcendent reality, as it were, at least in this language, that's beyond conditions altogether. That is our true birthright. Maybe I'll leave it there, but I wanted to just, no, maybe I'll leave it there. I'll say more about this phenomenon, that this complexity of relationships without actual things that relate tomorrow. And tomorrow we'll start to look at maybe the niyamas and how does this teaching of conditionality, of conditioned arising, how do we approach that to make sense of what is going on around us? I'll try and say a little bit more about that. And also, what do we do about it? Because it's one thing to even start to intellectually understand what's been got at. That doesn't necessarily go very deep, usually, unless we can start to change our lives according to this teaching. So how do we do that? So I'll start to talk in those terms a bit more tomorrow. So hopefully see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.